Let's give another view on this. Roland Henwood's a lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria, a commentator there. Roland, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. Just in the last 2 hours, you see the US President Joe Biden speaking along with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden earlier saying that he did not believe Israel was responsible for this explosion at the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital. I mean, is he basing that on evidence, or is he basing that only on his relationship with Israel?
Good afternoon, Stephen. No, I think it's more than just the relationship with Israel. There seems to be more and more information coming out of what has happened there, and there are definitely grounds, it seems, to question the first version of what happened. What is not clear is what exactly caused the explosion and where it came from. But there's definitely, I think, reason to not just accept what came out in the first, in the immediate aftermath of the explosion itself.
How would you term the relationship between the US and Israel right now? I mean, it seems that Biden is a little concerned about what's happening and perhaps concerned about Israel's behavior here. I mean, yes, he keeps saying in public that they support Israel. He sort of has to say that. Behind the scenes, slightly different?
Yes, I think the relationship is not the best friends relationship that one would expect. It's known that Mr. Biden has known Mr. Netanyahu for decades, and they do not have the best relationship always. There is some tension and there are serious differences. And we've seen that play out with Mr. Netanyahu visiting the US, for instance, and addressing Congress at the invitation of the Republicans and basically ignoring the Democrats and ignoring the current president in the process. And there are also important differences in terms of the approach to what should happen in Israel and specifically in terms of Palestine. And we see again now, although it's a show of force and a show of unity, underlying this, there are important cues that indicates it's not just a question of carte blanche for the Israelis. Mr. Biden is very specific in what he's saying. This two-state solution, for instance, that he is pushing again. And we know that Mr. Netanyahu is actually one that has cast doubt on that and has actually, for all purposes, blocked that process and favoring a different solution. Also, the fact that President Biden is very specific in terms of there must be humanitarian aid and the killing of civilians is not acceptable. I think what is also important is that one must not look at President Biden's visit in isolation. You must look at this as a follow-on from the Secretary of State visiting the region, spending 8 hours in a meeting or more than 8 hours in a meeting with Mr. Netanyahu. I think that indicates that there are some seriousness discussions and negotiations on trying to calm down the situation. And also my expectation is, or my understanding is, trying to prevent a full-scale war and just a no-holds-barred approach into a ground offensive. That probably will be a very difficult objective, but the ground offensive is probably going to be a line that once that is crossed, there's no guarantees as to what is going to happen and what the outcome would be.
About an hour ago, Naeem Jinnah, talking to us on Newzroom Afrika channel 405, made the point that in the last 2 weeks, many unprecedented things have happened. He said one of them was, as he understood it, also was my understanding that Jordan was the one that cancelled the summit that would involve Biden. A Voice of America correspondent in Washington telling us a moment ago they believe it was in fact Biden's decision to cancel that summit. I mean, does it matter? Was it just the fact that the summit is cancelled, or is this important to know what actually happened?
I think it's going to be important to know what happens. The context and the history of the conflict between the Israeli and Palestinians is, I think, often just limited to a simplistic approach of they have historic differences and they are going to continue fighting. So yes, the details may matter. What I understand is that Mr. Biden will definitely have a call to President al-Sisi of Egypt and to President Abbas of the Palestinian organization or government in the West Bank once he leaves Israel. So the meeting may have been cancelled in Jordan, the face-to-face meeting, but my understanding is there will be an engagement with both the other leaders, and they are two key players in the process. I think what one must also be careful of in terms of details is to remember that there's a lot of divisions in Palestine. And Hamas is not the favored representative and only representative of Palestinian interests. Mr. Abbas is still a very important figure and is much more respected and accepted in especially the Western world than any of the other role players. And the developments of the last few days, I think, indicates that. It's also clear that Egypt is not comfortable with Hamas, and that's why they're holding back, protecting their own interests, but also refusing to engage at a level that is going to compromise them. And this is one of the details and the difficulties in that conflict, is that there are many governments in the region who will side with Palestine, but they don't want to side with Hamas and organizations like that. And that complicates things because they don't support and come out in terms of what the Israelis are doing. They object to that, but they're also not happy with what is happening on the other side. And that makes it very complex and very difficult to engage in a way that is going to lead to outcomes that may be acceptable and desirable.
In the hours sort of after the attacks by Hamas on Israel, they've now lost, I think, 1,400 people is the number that I have since those attacks last week. A lot of people would have looked at it, seen the videos, been on social media, and probably had some sympathy with Israeli civilians in that moment. Since then, it seems to me the balance may well have shifted. The number of Palestinians dead, 3,000 people. And I think this must be said, Roland, as a direct consequence of Israeli actions. Now we have this hospital explosion. Yes, as you say, grounds to believe that may not have been a direct result of Israel's actions, although could well be seen as a consequence of Israel's actions in creating this situation. Could Israel be about to lose some of the support it has in some parts of the world over the way it's handling Gaza right now, over the way it's treating civilians in Gaza?
This was always going to be the outcome, and that was one of the reasons why many warned Israel and tried to get Israel not to react in the way that was expected, a very harsh and very direct military confrontation. And the longer this continues, the more difficult it becomes for Israel to maintain the support and the sympathy of people. But again, one must be careful. There is so much disinformation and so much propaganda going on around what is happening there. So you had the initial attacks on Israel and the support and sympathy to that. And I don't think that has disappeared. But there are questions being asked as to the legality of what Israel is doing in terms of its bombing campaign, in terms of basically forcing a population to evacuate where they live, in terms of what is seen by some as indiscriminate bombings. That is always going to be difficult to accept and also to rationally explain why that is necessary. That brings into the equation other issues, such as, is this just vengeance, or is it a campaign that is carefully constructed to maintain the safety and security of Israel and its interests? Is it proportionate to what has been done? And this becomes quite technical and difficult, and I can't give an answer to that. On the other hand, the response from Palestine is not changed. We still see regular firing of missiles and skirmishes that is taking place, and often this is not aimed at Israeli military, but at civilians. So I think the whole issue here is that civilians are caught in this, and they become the collateral damage, and seems to be accepted, normalized in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is the issue. It's not just one of the sides that is doing this. It seems that all the organizations involved is acting in this way. I mean, one can ask harsh questions about the targeting that is happening in Gaza, the kind of munitions that are being used. What are the security mechanisms to protect people who are living there, and that's the only thing that they've done wrong. On the other hand, same question can probably be asked in terms of the indiscriminate firing of rockets into Israel and into Israeli residence areas. So it's a mess, and probably the only solution here is to stop the conflict as soon as possible, because there aren't going to be any winners in this. There are going to be massive victims and damage, and that is not a reason to continue with what is happening there.
Roland Henwood, thank you, lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. Really do appreciate the analysis and the views.